This year at World Lung, we're actually presenting some later phase work. So last year we presented phases 1 and 2 of the work, which covered a review of 20 informed consent forms in the lung cancer space, and then some patient interviews and focus groups that we had conducted to learn about. They'd read a hypothetical informed consent form, and then we asked them some questions about the different sections, what information they were prioritizing for making a decision. And we had people who had been in a clinical trial previously and those who hadn't, to see if there was differences in preference for information if you'd already been through the process of an informed consent form. And so this year we've conducted 3 additional phases of work and are presenting those new additional pieces, which include we had a stakeholder roundtable, which was with industry partners to learn about if we were to create an addendum that would go with like a trifold pamphlet for the patients, much like a pamphlet leaflet, but for the informed consent form piece, what might be some of the challenges that they might have implementing such a document as part of their clinical trials. And so we heard a variety of different issues that might rise to the top, and with the most common problem being how would the information be selected to ensure, because it wouldn't be all the requirements that the FDA, Health and Human Services and regulatory bodies require. It would have to be a limited amount of information. How would we pick that information and not be seen as cherry picking, if you will, right? So we heard that feedback pretty loud and clear and weren't sure the best places to get information. We knew we didn't have that information. So what we did basically was add an additional phase where we interviewed a whole host of stakeholders. And so that's really the focus of the presentation at World Lung this year, is to describe those findings. And so we spoke to IRB chairs, the legal and compliance folks at drug companies, ethicists, regulators, trialists, both the principal investigators as well as nurse navigator researchers who are actually doing the informed consent with patients, to learn about what their take on a document like this would be. We also spoke to a CRO. So we really try to look at this from a systems approach versus what we've seen in a lot of the other research focused on informed consent forms is that it they'll focus in on trialists, but then miss the IRB piece, or they'll focus over there. And so we're trying to pull it all together. And then we also, at the same time, ran a much larger survey because the focus groups and interviews were limited in number. So we had an online survey where we have responses from about 140 patients and caregivers to get more information on their preferences, and also about presenting risk information, like preferences for, do you want to see it as a picture? Do you want to see that information in words, statistics? And what we found with that was that most people, it falls sort of roughly equal numbers of people. So there's some people who want to see it in pictures, and a similar number want to see it just written out in plain words, and a similar number want to see it sort of as a probability statement. So there's no clear direction from that, but people do want to see things in bullet form and short text from the patient and caregiver side. And from the interviews that we've done with the sort of the systems approach interviews, what we've actually seen is that there's not a lot of consensus around what the best pathway to take is. There's a fair bit of variability and different things that would need to be sort of hashed out if you went for a trifold. From the sort of more IRB side of things, it becomes an additional document that has to go through review. From the CRO side, they actually see it as a good thing as long as there's a really clear guideline document that would go with it to implement something like that. But also during this work, what we found, what happened was that the FDA created a new proposed rulemaking, and they're looking to align more with Health and Human Services in the US and present a patient level summary at the beginning of the informed consent form rather than a trifold pamphlet. So now we're sort of looking at these two options and seeing, do we want to go down the route of giving trying to provide some guidelines on a summary included in the informed consent form, or do we want to go down the route of a pamphlet? And that's where we currently are standing. So we're still sort of trying to see which path might be best, but what we would ideally like to do as next steps is mock something up with a hypothetical example for patients and caregivers to review, and then sit down with them and debrief those documents and get their feedback, right? Because ultimately they're the ones who are going to have to look at this information and make a decision on whether they want to participate.